Stop teasing me, touch it already. Alien woman's frustrated demand. Cold, metal cold seeping through thin fabric, Alex cracked an eyelid. Dim blue-tinged light pulsed softly from strips along the ceiling junction. Where the hell? Memory snagged, then ripped free. The venture. The attack, alarm screaming, hull groaning then. Nothing, now this. A narrow cot, some kind of plasti-steel surface beneath him. He wasn't restrained, but moving felt like dragging lead weights. Every muscle screamed protest. A shadow detached itself from the deeper gloom near the wall. Tall. Inhumanly still. Moving with a silence that prickled the hairs on his neck. Dark suit absorbing the faint light. A blank faceplate reflecting his own blurry outline back at him. Oh, fantastic. Captured, or worse. Technician third class Alex Ryder, a voice stated. Female, tonally flat like a synthesized report. It came from the figure, though no mouth moved on the reflective surface. Your biometrics are stabilizing. Minimal tissue damage detected beyond baseline bruising consistent with rapid deceleration trauma. Alex swallowed, throat dry and raw. Baseline bruising, swell. He tried to push himself up on his elbows. The room tilted slightly. The figure took a step closer, a smooth, gliding motion that was utterly silent. Close enough now he could feel. Not heat, but a subtle displacement of air. A coolness. Remain supine. Systemic shock is still a moderate probability. The faceplate tilted fractionally. Your designation implies familiarity with technical parameters. Adhere to medical advisories. Right, medical advisories from the alien who probably blew his ship out from under him. Makes perfect sense. He let his head fall back onto the cold surface. Might as well play along, for now. Sure thing, Doc, whatever you say. His voice was rougher than he expected. I am not designated Doc. I am Coordinator Lyra. The name hung in the air, sterile as the room. Your file indicated a tendency towards non-standard forms of address under duress. This is suboptimal but noted. She'd read his file. How? When? Alarm bells started clanging louder in his skull. They didn't just shoot down the venture, they boarded it, or sifted through the wreckage. My file, huh? Hope you enjoyed the performance reviews. Always knew my sarcastic commentary would get me places. Like an alien interrogation room. Performance metrics were within expected deviation for Terran personnel under long-duration assignment stress, Lyra replied, the blank faceplate unwavering. Your psychological profile indicated resilience coupled with defensive humor patterns. Assessment appears accurate. Great, psychoanalyzed by the enemy. He closed his eyes for a second. Think, assess, trapped, weak. Unknown environment, captor present apparently knows everything about him. Survival first, information second, escape, a distant third. He opened his eyes again. Lyra hadn't moved, a statue in tactical gear. So, Coordinator, he said, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. What's the agenda? Torture, probing. Please tell me it's not probing. Your vessel trespassed in restricted Cathar Confederacy territory during a high-alert security protocol, Lyra stated, ignoring his question, or maybe answering it with terrifying directness. Standard procedure mandated disabling and investigation. Disabling felt more like obliterating. Damage assessment indicates your vessel remains partially salvageable, she countered flatly. Your survival pod deployed correctly but sustained secondary damage impacting life support. We retrieved you. Retrieved, like pulling a piece of interesting debris from the void. Lucky him. He shifted slightly, testing his limbs. Sore, bruised but functional, no obvious broken bones. Right, lucky me. Thanks for the pickup. Can I go home now? Negative. Your status is pending evaluation. The faceplate seemed to loom closer, though she hadn't moved, an optical illusion of the dim light and his own anxiety. Your cooperation is required for diagnostic procedures. Here it comes. Define cooperation. Compliance with instructions. Accurate response to inquiries. Physical system interface when necessary. Physical system interface. He didn't like the sound of that. not one bit. Certain diagnostic equipment requires direct bioconductivity. She gestured with one hand, long fingers sheathed in the same dark material as her suit. The gesture was precise, economical. Your species exhibits variable resistance. Manual contact ensures optimal data acquisition. Manual contact, with her. The thought sent a jolt through him stronger than the ship's impact. He stared at the hand, then back at the blank faceplate. Don't suppose you have a probe for that, bad joke writer. Read the room. Automated probes risk epidermal tearing with non-compliant subjects, Lyra replied, utterly serious. Manual application allows for pressure modulation. He almost laughed, almost. She thought he was worried about skin tears. The absurdity was staggering. Right, wouldn't want that. He pushed himself up again, slower this time, swinging his legs over the side of the cot. His feet found the floor, colder than the cot, some kind of smooth, seamless material. The room spun for a second, then settled. He stayed put, head down, breathing deliberately. Lyra observed him without comment. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken threat. He could feel her gaze even though he couldn't see eyes. It was like being watched by a security camera, but one that could reach out and touch you. He risked a glance up, still there, still unreadable. Proceed with the diagnostic, she instructed. She produced a small, metallic cylinder from somewhere on her suit. It gleamed faintly in the blue light. Where? He asked, trying to sound braver than he felt. She indicated a spot on his forearm just below the elbow. Position your arm, palm upward. He hesitated. Every instinct screamed danger. Don't let it touch you. Don't comply. But what was the alternative? Fight. He was weak, unarmed in her territory. He slowly extended his left arm, turning his palm up. His hand trembled slightly. Get a grip. Lyra stepped closer. Close enough that he could feel the subtle coolness emanating from her suit, smell a faint, sterile scent like ozone and cold metal. She reached out. Her fingers, clad in the dark, slightly textured material of her glove, closed around his wrist. Not tight, but firm, unyielding. Her touch was cool, almost cold, even through the fabric. It sent an unexpected shock up his arm, raising goosebumps despite the room's neutral temperature. It wasn't painful. It wasn't aggressive. It was clinical, efficient, and utterly terrifying. He flinched involuntarily. Maintain stillness, Lyra commanded, her voice unchanged. Her grip tightened fractionally, just enough to stop the tremor. Resistance complicates the reading. She brought the cylinder closer to his forearm. He braced himself. The cylinder didn't touch him directly. Instead, a thin beam of red light projected from its tip onto his skin. It felt warm, oddly specific, like a pinpoint of sunlight. Lyra watched the cylinder, not his face. Her own faceplate remained impassive, reflecting the red beam. Vascular flow nominal, she murmured, more to the device than to him. Neurological response within acceptable parameters, accounting for adrenaline saturation. She shifted her grip slightly, turning his arm to scan the underside. Her thumb brushed against the sensitive skin of his inner wrist. Another jolt, sharp and unexpected. He sucked in a breath. Just data acquisition. Keep telling yourself that. She released his wrist as abruptly as she'd taken it. The cylinder retracted its beam and she clipped it back onto her suit. The absence of her touch was almost as jarring as its presence. He lowered his arm slowly, rubbing the spot where her fingers had been. It still felt cold. Initial diagnostics complete, Lyra announced. You require hydration and nutrient replenishment. Follow me. She turned and glided towards the only door visible in the dim room. It hissed open at her approach, revealing a corridor bathed in the same low, blue light. He didn't move immediately. Follow her, just like that. Trust the alien who disabled his ship and held him captive. Seemed like a terrible idea, but staying here alone, weak and without resources, seemed worse. Pragmatism won, barely. He pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. One step at a time, Ryder. He walked towards the door, towards the waiting, silent figure of coordinator Lyra. This was going to be a long day, assuming they still measured time in days here. The corridor was narrow, walls made of the same seamless, dark material as the room. The blue light pulsed rhythmically, casting long, distorted shadows. Lyra moved ahead at a steady pace, her steps completely silent on the metallic floor. He had to hurry to keep up, his own footsteps echoing unnervingly in the confined space. "Slow down," he grunted, breathing a little harder than he liked. Residual shock, probably, or maybe just the crushing anxiety. Lyra paused, turning her upper body slightly. The faceplate caught the light. "My pace is calibrated for standard humanoid locomotion. Are you experiencing mobility impairment beyond the initial assessment?" Just catching my breath. Sarcasm felt like the only weapon he had left. Bit of a rough morning. "It is cycle 3, period 7 by local designation," she corrected flatly. "Time correlation to Terran standard is complex due to relativistic factors and requires further data from your vessel's chronometer." "Right, cycle 3. Good to know. Couldn't care less." He focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The air felt thin, recycled, carrying that same faint ozone tang. No windows, no signs of other life. Just him and the silent coordinator in a blue-lit maze. He felt trapped, a rat following a particularly unnerving exterminator. They reached another door. It slid open onto a slightly larger room, marginally brighter. A simple table and 2 chairs, more like minimalist slabs, dominated the center. On the table sat a sealed container and a bulbous, opaque bottle. Lyra gestured towards them. "Nutrient paste formulation, 7B optimized for Terran physiology based on available data. Hydration fluid." He eyed the container warily. Nutrient paste sounded delicious. "You guys eat this stuff?" "Cathar dietary requirements differ significantly." "I'll bet." He walked over to the table, picked up the bottle. It was cool to the touch, smooth, no label. He twisted the cap, a faint hiss. He sniffed it cautiously. Water or something close enough. He took a tentative sip. Cool, clean, slightly metallic aftertaste. Better than nothing. He drank more deeply, feeling the liquid soothe his dry throat. Lyra watched him, motionless. Her stillness was more unnerving than overt hostility. It felt like being observed under a microscope. He put the bottle down and looked at the paste container. Peel back lid. He hesitated. "Is consumption causing you distress?" Lyra inquired. "Just admiring the packaging." He peeled back the lid. A thick grayish substance greeted him. Utterly unappetizing, looked like engine grease, smelled faintly, chalky, bon appetit. He needed energy. He dipped a finger in tentatively, then licked it off. Tasteless. Texture like wet sand, grim but probably packed with calories. He needed calories. He forced himself to scoop out more with his fingers, swallowing it down quickly before his gag reflex kicked in. "Your method of consumption is inefficient," Lyra observed. "Utensils are available upon request." "Nah, I'm good. Like to get my hands dirty." He wiped his fingers on his trousers. Probably pointless, the fabric felt synthetic and unlikely to absorb anything. He ate more paste, washing it down with the water. It settled in his stomach like a lump of clay, but the raw edge of hunger started to fade. He finished about half the paste, unable to stomach more. He capped the container and took another long drink of water. He felt marginally better, less shaky, more aware, which meant the fear was sharpening its edges again. He leaned back against the table, crossing his arms, trying to look casual, probably failing miserably. "All right, coordinator, I've had my space rations. Now what? More tests? Or do we get to the part where you tell me why I'm really here?" Lyra tilted her head again, that fractional movement that somehow conveyed intense scrutiny. "Your presence is an anomaly. Unauthorized vessel, unscheduled arrival during heightened security. Standard protocol requires containment and assessment." "Assessment for what? Threat level, intelligence value, or spare parts?" "All relevant parameters," she confirmed, "including potential compatibility." That last word landed wrong. Compatibility, what the hell did that mean? Compatibility with what? Your decor. Compatibility with Cathar operational directives. Her flat tone gave nothing away. It could mean anything. Prisoner exchange, forced labor, something worse. His stomach tightened. "Look," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm just a tech, third class. I fix comm relays and diagnostic scanners. I don't know fleet movements or defense codes. Whatever you think you can get out of me, you're wrong." "Your technical skills are documented," Lyra acknowledged. "Specifically, your aptitude with adaptive diagnostic systems and non-standard energy interfaces." How detailed was that file? They knew his specialties. Lucky guess. "Data does not rely on luck," she stated. "A component requires calibration. Your expertise is relevant." He stared at her. They wanted him to work for them, fix their stuff after shooting him down. "You're kidding, right?" Cathar do not engage in kidding. The situation is urgent. A primary energy conduit regulator is malfunctioning. Standard Cathar technicians have been unable to isolate the fault due to atypical energy fluctuations caused by the recent defensive engagement. The engagement that crippled his ship and killed who knows how many of his crewmates, and she wanted him to fix the mess it caused. The nerve. "Let me get this straight. You shoot down my ship, maybe kill my friends, kidnap me, feed me nutrient sludge, and now you want me to fix your power problems." Anger, hot and sharp, finally cut through the fear. "Your assessment is emotionally biased but contains factual elements," Lyra conceded without inflection. "The regulator failure impacts critical systems, including containment fields for salvaged materials. Salvaged materials like pieces of the Venture, maybe even survivors." Hope flickered, faint but fierce. "If helping them meant getting access, finding out if anyone else made it." Containment fields. "Correct. Failure risks uncontrolled energy discharge and potential loss of sensitive materials." Sensitive materials could mean weapons, could mean bodies, could mean escape pods. He had to know, but he couldn't seem desperate. "And you think I can just waltz in and fix it?" "Your profile suggests a high probability of success with adaptive diagnostics." She took a step towards him. He automatically tensed, bracing himself. "Your cooperation ensures continued systemic stability for all parties." A veiled threat. Continued stability for him meant breathing. For them, it meant their systems kept running. The leverage was obvious. And maybe, just maybe, it was an opportunity. "What's in it for me?" "Continued biological function," Lyra stated simply. Can't argue with that logic. He pushed himself off the table. "All right, coordinator, show me this busted regulator. But if I get vaporized by some alien power surge, I'm blamming you in my incident report." "Incident reports are irrelevant in Cathar jurisdiction," she replied, turning towards the door. "Follow." He followed, the nutrient paste sitting heavy in his gut, the cold dread mixing with a new, sharp purpose. Find out what happened, find out who else survived, fix their damn machine, and then figure out how to get the hell out of here. The corridor stretched ahead, blue lights pulsing like a slow, cold heartbeat. Lyra's silent, imposing figure led the way into the unknown. The journey took them deeper into the structure. More corridors, identical except for subtle shifts in the ambient hum or temperature. He tried to keep track of turns, landmarks, anything, but it was a disorienting maze of dark metal and blue light. Lyra moved with unnerving certainty, never hesitating at junctions. "She owns this place, you're just cargo." They passed several sealed doors. He wondered what lay behind them. Storage, labs, crew quarters, other prisoners. The thought sent a fresh chill down his spine. He kept glancing back, but the corridors always seemed empty behind them. Just the echo of his own steps and the oppressive silence of Lyra's passage. Finally, they arrived at a larger chamber. This one hummed louder, a deep thrumming that vibrated through the floor. Complex machinery lined the walls, cables thick as his arms snaking across the floor and ceiling, converging on a central console that glowed with intricate, alien symbols. The air here was warmer, charged with static electricity that made his hair stand on end. Lyra stopped before the main console. This is the primary conduit access point. The regulator malfunction is localized within this subsystem. She gestured towards a specific panel inset into the console, dark and inert compared to the surrounding illuminated controls. He approached cautiously, eyeing the complex setup. It looked vaguely familiar in principle: power distribution, diagnostic readouts, but the design language was completely alien. Sharp angles, pulsing geometric patterns instead of familiar gauges or text. Right. And where's the off switch? Power interruption is not feasible, Lyra stated. The conduit feeds essential systems, including environmental controls for this section. Of course it does. Easy mode disabled. So I'm supposed to poke around in a live high-energy conduit. Precisely. Your expertise is required to interface with the diagnostic port. She pointed to a small, recessed socket on the inert panel, and reroute energy flow manually while isolating the damaged regulator component. He leaned closer, examining the port. It wasn't like any interface he knew. A series of concentric metallic rings surrounding a central crystalline structure. Need some tools. Scanners. Interface adapter, maybe. Lyra produced another device from her suit, different from the medical scanner. Flatter, more angular, with a short, flexible cable ending in a multi-pronged connector. This diagnostic tool provides limited interface capabilities. It can analyze energy patterns and suggest rerouting pathways. Direct manipulation requires biosignature calibration. Biosignature calibration. He looked from the tool to her blank faceplate. Don't tell me. The tool must sync with your unique bioelectrical field to bypass security protocols and allow manual override. She held out the tool. Requires direct skin contact with the primary hand sensor. There it was again. Contact, always contact. He eyed the indicated sensor, a smooth, dark pad on the tool's surface. Why not use your own biosignature? Cathar biofields interfere with the Terran-derived adaptive algorithms necessary for this specific diagnostic, she explained patiently, as if lecturing a slow student. Your field is compatible. Compatible, that word again. It made his skin crawl, but the thrumming energy in the room felt unstable, menacing. And if this powered containment, he took a breath. Okay, let's get this over with. He reached for the tool. His fingers brushed hers as he took it. Another jolt of that unnatural coolness, amplified by the static charge in the air. He pulled his hand back quickly, the tool feeling heavy and strange in his grasp. He fumbled with it for a moment, trying to get a proper grip. Place your palm firmly on the sensor pad, Lyra instructed. He hesitated, then pressed his palm against the dark pad. It felt cool, smooth. A faint vibration started deep within the tool, humming up his arm. Lights flickered erratically on the tool's surface. Maintain contact, Lyra ordered. Calibration in progress. He stood there, hand pressed against the alien device, intensely aware of Lyra standing just beside him. He could feel the faint vibration from her own suit systems, or maybe it was just the thrum of the room. The air crackled. He felt exposed, vulnerable, like his very life force was being scanned and indexed by this machine, under her impassive gaze. Just fix the damn thing, Ryder. Then worry about the existential dread. The lights on the tool stabilized, glowing a steady green. Calibration complete, Lyra announced. You may now interface with the diagnostic port. He pulled his hand away, flexing his fingers. They felt tingly. He hefted the tool, then turned to the console, inserting the multi-pronged connector into the strange socket. It clicked into place with unnerving softness. The previously dark panel flickered to life, displaying a dizzying array of swirling energy patterns and alien script. Okay, he muttered, trying to make sense of the display. What am I looking at? Lyra leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his as she pointed to a section of the screen. This represents the primary energy flow. These patterns indicate harmonic instability originating from regulator Unit 7 Gamma. Her proximity was unnerving. He could almost feel the contours of her suit against his arm, the sheer physical presence of her. He tried to focus on the screen, on the chaotic pattern she indicated. It looked like a psychedelic nightmare. Instability looks more like it's about to explode. Imminent failure is probable within the next operational cycle, Lyra confirmed calmly. You must establish a bypass loop before initiating diagnostic. Right, bypass loop. Easy peasy. He scanned the interface tool in his hand. It now showed simplified graphics, presumably translated from the main console display. Arrows, flow diagrams, pulsating nodes. Still confusing but slightly more manageable. He tentatively touched a control node on the tool's small screen. The main display reacted instantly, a section of the energy pattern shifting color. Okay, progress, don't screw this up. He worked carefully, tracing energy flows, trying to understand the logic of the system. It was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. Less like engineering, more like coaxing a living creature. Lyra remained beside him, silent, observing. Occasionally, she'd point out a subtle flicker on the display he'd missed, or murmur a technical term in her flat voice that somehow clarified the chaos. Divert power through auxiliary channel Delta 9, she advised, pointing again. Her finger, still sheathed in the dark glove, hovered inches from the screen, then brushed against his hand holding the tool as she retracted it. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent another shockwave through him. He jerked his hand, nearly dropping the tool. Watch it, he snapped, instantly regretting the sharp tone. Lyra tilted her head. My apologies. Spatial awareness protocols require adjustment for interspecies proximity. She sounded like she was reciting from a manual. Did the contact impede your function? No, he lied, his heart hammering. Just startled me. Lying to the alien mind reader. Smart. He forced his attention back to the screen, hands unsteady. He could feel her watching him, probably analyzing his elevated heart rate and microexpressions, if she had expressions, behind the mask. He managed to establish the bypass loop. The chaotic energy patterns on the main display smoothed slightly, the angry red pulses softening to a wary orange. The thrumming in the room seemed to lessen fractionally. Okay, bypass active. Now what? Initiate diagnostic sequence on regulator 7 Gamma, Lyra instructed. The tool will attempt to isolate the fault. He found the command on the tool's interface, hesitated for a split second, then activated it. The tool hummed louder. On the main screen, intricate scanning beams overlaid the image of the regulator unit. Data scrolled rapidly in alien script. Analysis progressing, Lyra reported. Multiple microfractures detected in the primary containment matrix. Energy leakage exceeding threshold. Microfractures from what? Your defensive engagement. Correlation is probable, she admitted without inflection. The regulator absorbed excessive energy discharge. Absorbed it, saving your asses, maybe. He didn't say it. He watched the diagnostic run, feeling a grudging sense of accomplishment mixed with resentment. He was actually fixing their problem, the problem they caused. The diagnostic completed. A schematic appeared on the tool's screen, highlighting the damaged sections of the regulator. Fault isolated, Lyra stated. Repairs require physical component replacement. That is beyond your current capability or authorization. So what was the point of all this? He asked, frustrated. Stabilization. The bypass prevents catastrophic failure. It buys time for authorized Cathar technicians to effect repairs. She reached out and carefully disconnected the diagnostic tool from the console port. The panel went dark again. Your assigned task is complete. You performed within expected parameters. Expected parameters. Like he was a machine component himself. He felt drained, jittery from the adrenaline and the proximity to the raw energy. And to her, great. Can I get my continued biological function reward now? Maybe a slightly less gray paste. Nutrient replenishment can be arranged, Lyra replied. Return to the assigned quarters. She started towards the door, expecting him to follow. He didn't move. Something felt unfinished, dangerous. What about the salvaged materials, the containment fields? Lyra paused at the doorway, turning back slightly. The bypass ensures field integrity for approximately 3 cycles. Sufficient time. Sufficient time for what? To sort through the wreckage, to see if anyone else from the venture. He trailed off, unable to voice the desperate hope. The faceplate seemed to stare right through him. Salvage assessment is ongoing. Relevant information regarding other Terran survivors will be relayed if and when confirmed. If and when, cold comfort. He felt a surge of anger, helplessness. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, to break through that infuriating calm. But he clenched his fists instead, digging fingernails into his palms. Survival first. Getting access was the priority. Pissing her off wouldn't help. Fine, he bit out, lead the way. She turned and glided out into the blue-lit corridor. He followed, the thrumming energy chamber behind him, the weight of uncertainty pressing down. He'd fixed her machine. Now he was back to being the prisoner, the anomaly, the compatible component in her cold, alien world, and the feeling of her cool touch still lingered on his skin. The return journey felt longer, the silence thicker. Alex replayed the events in the energy chamber, the feel of the humming tool, the brush of Lyra's hand, the swirling chaos on the screen. He'd cooperated. He'd done what she asked. Had it earned him anything? A slightly less gray meal, or just deeper entanglement in whatever game the Cathar were playing? They reached the small room with the table and chairs. The leftover nutrient paste and water bottle were still there. Lyra gestured towards the cot in the adjoining diagnostic room. Rest cycle is authorized. Consume remaining nutrients as required. Thrilling. He didn't move towards the cot. He wasn't tired, he was wired, strung out. What happens next? Further assessment, Lyra stated. Analysis of your diagnostic performance, cross-referencing with Cathar technical requirements. So more tests, more fixing your broken stuff. Your skills may be utilized if deemed necessary and beneficial. Beneficial to them, obviously. He leaned against the doorframe, blocking her exit from the main room slightly, a small act of defiance. And if I refuse? Lyra stopped. She didn't turn fully, but he felt her attention focus on him. Refusal would be classified as noncompliance. Protocols for noncompliance are stringent. Stringent, he could guess what that meant. Back to the cold slab, maybe with actual restraints this time, or worse. Right, good to know the options. She made a subtle motion to pass him. He held his ground for a second longer, forcing her to adjust her path slightly to get around him. A minuscule power play, probably pointless, but it made him feel marginally less helpless. She glided past without comment, her shoulder brushing his arm as she did. That cool, unsettling contact again. It made him grit his teeth. Stop letting her get to you. Easier said than done. The door to the corridor hissed shut behind her, leaving him alone in the silence. He looked at the gray paste, then at the narrow cot rest cycle. Right, like he could sleep. He paced the small room, 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. Trapped, utterly trapped. But he'd gotten a glimpse behind the curtain. He'd interacted with their tech. He'd proven useful. Maybe, just maybe, he could leverage that. He needed more information. About the ship, the crew, this place, the Cathar. About Lyra. What was behind that blank faceplate? Was there anything remotely like emotion, or just cold, hard logic? He remembered her slight hesitation before disconnecting the tool, her comment about spatial awareness. Tiny cracks, or just him projecting human traits onto something utterly alien. He forced himself to sit on the edge of the cot. He wasn't getting out by packing. He needed to think, plan. But his thoughts kept circling back to the feel of her touch, the unnerving coolness, the controlled strength. It wasn't just clinical anymore. It felt possessive, like she was cataloging him, assessing him on levels he couldn't comprehend. Compatibility, what did it mean? He lay back on the cot, staring up at the pulsing blue lights. Sleep was impossible. Every hum of the station, every flicker of light kept him on edge. He was a tool waiting to be picked up and used again. And the worst part, a small, treacherous part of him was curious about what the next task would be. Just to break the monotony. Just to feel useful again, even if it was for the enemy. Even if it meant more contact with the unnerving coordinator Lyra. He closed his eyes, but the image of the blank faceplate lingered behind his eyelids. Cold, silent, watching. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt warped in the constant blue twilight. He must have drifted off eventually, exhaustion overriding anxiety because a sound jolted him awake. The hiss of the door sliding open. He sat bolt upright, heart pounding, fists clenching reflexively. Lyra stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the corridor light. Same impassive stance, same blank faceplate. Technician Ryder, your presence is required. Here we go again. Didn't get the memo about the mandatory wake-up call. He swung his legs off the cot, joints stiff. What critical system needs my Terran magic touch this time? This is not a technical task, Lyra stated, stepping aside to let him pass. It is a required environmental adaptation assessment. Environmental adaptation, he eyed her warily. Sounds suspiciously like, let's see if the human freezes, boils, suffocates. The assessment involves exposure to simulated Cathar atmospheric conditions under controlled parameters, she explained. Your physiological responses will be monitored. Just keeps getting better, why? To determine tolerance thresholds, necessary data for potential long-term integration or relocation. Long-term integration, relocation, he didn't like the sound of either. Integration into what? Your collection. Integration implies functional coexistence, Lyra replied. Proceed to the assessment chamber. She gestured down a different corridor than before, one that branched off near his quarters. He followed reluctantly. More tests, more monitoring, more feeling like a lab rat. This corridor felt colder, the air sharper. The blue lights seemed dimmer here, less frequent. They stopped before a heavy-looking circular door like an airlock. Lyra placed her hand on a panel beside it. The panel glowed green, and the door irised open with a heavy pneumatic sigh, revealing a chamber beyond. The chamber was small, circular, maybe 10 feet across. Walls of the same dark metal, but embedded with complex sensor arrays and nozzles. The air inside felt different already, colder, thinner, with a faint, sharp chemical tang he couldn't identify. Enter the chamber, Lyra instructed. Remain in the center, monitoring will commence. He hesitated at the threshold. Stepping into that chamber felt like stepping into a cage. And you'll be. Observing from the control station. She indicated a thick transparent steel window set into the wall opposite the door. A console was visible behind it. Right, safe and sound behind the glass. He took a deep breath of the relatively normal corridor air, then stepped inside. The door irised shut behind him with a heavy thud, sealing him in. He instantly felt more exposed, more vulnerable. The air was definitely colder here, raising goosebumps on his arms beneath the thin fabric of his jumpsuit. He instinctively wrapped his arms around himself. Okay, Ryder, just breathe. It's just a test. Through the window, he saw Lyra approach the console. Her movements were efficient, precise. Lights flickered on the console and a low hum filled the chamber. He watched her, looking for any sign, any reaction on the blank faceplate, but there was nothing. Just the reflection of the chamber lights and his own tense figure. A faint hiss emanated from the nozzles in the wall. The air grew colder rapidly, much colder. A dry, biting cold that seemed to leach the warmth directly from his bones. He started shivering uncontrollably. His breath plumed in front of him, white vapor in the dim light. Temperature decreasing to Cathar standard atmospheric baseline, Lyra's voice announced over an intercom, still utterly flat. Monitor your respiration. Report any acute discomfort. Acute discomfort. He was already acutely uncomfortable. He was freezing. It's cold, he managed, teeth chattering. Acknowledged. Core temperature reading, 35.8 degrees Celsius, within initial stress tolerance. He hugged himself tighter, trying to generate warmth, packing in tight circles. The metal floor was like ice beneath his thin-soled boots. How long was this going to last? He glanced at Lyra through the window. She was watching the readouts on her console, occasionally tapping controls. Was she enjoying this? Did Cathar even feel enjoyment? The chemical tang in the air grew stronger, sharper. It started to burn his nostrils, make his eyes water. Air composition changing, he gasped out, coughing. Nitrogen-argon ratio increasing, Lyra's voice confirmed. Oxygen partial pressure decreasing to Cathar optimal levels. Report hypoxia symptoms, dizziness, blurred vision, confusion. He was already feeling lightheaded. The cold, the thin air. It was getting hard to think straight. He leaned against the wall for support, shivering violently. Focus. Stay functional. He forced himself to take slow, deliberate breaths, trying to maximize oxygen intake. Subject exhibiting moderate physiological stress, Lyra's voice intoned. Vasoconstriction noted. Respiration rate elevated. She sounded like she was reading a weather report. He pushed himself off the wall, trying to stay upright, stay conscious. He glared towards the window, towards the impassive figure behind it. How much longer? Assessment duration, dependent on stabilization or critical threshold breach, she replied. Currently projecting 7 additional chrono units. 7 more units. Units of what? Minutes? Hours? He wasn't sure he could last 7 more minutes. The cold was sinking deep, making his muscles stiff, his movements sluggish. The thin air made his head spin. He stumbled, catching himself on the wall again. Suddenly, Lyra looked up from her console, her head tilting slightly as she looked directly at him. Or rather, at the space just beside him. He followed her unseen gaze. One of the sensor arrays on the wall was sparking intermittently, spitting tiny blue arcs of energy. Oh, that can't be good. Anomaly detected, Lyra stated. Atmospheric containment field fluctuation near sensor node 3 delta. The sparking intensified. A high-pitched whine started growing louder. The chamber lights flickered. Yeah, I see it, Alex shouted, instinctively backing away from the malfunctioning sensor. Maybe abort the test. Aborting prematurely invalidates data, Lyra replied. But she was rapidly manipulating controls on her console, attempting remote stabilization. The sparking didn't stop. It got worse. A larger arc jumped from the sensor to the metal wall with a loud crackle. The whining climbed to a piercing shriek. Warning klaxons started blaring, harsh and grating. Red lights flashed inside the chamber, bathing everything in an emergency glare. Stabilization failed, Lyra announced, her voice perhaps a fraction tighter than before. Containment breach imminent. Chamber evacuation protocols overridden by system fault. Overridden. He was trapped in here with malfunctioning high-energy equipment. Get me out of here, he yelled, banging on the thick window. Lyra was already moving away from the console, heading towards the chamber door controls. Manual override requires direct physical interface at the external panel, she said over the klaxons. Remain clear of the unstable node. Easier said than done in a small, circular room. He pressed himself against the wall furthest from the sparking sensor, watching in horror as the arcs grew larger, more violent. The air temperature spiked suddenly, waves of heat washing over him, followed by an intense cold that felt like freezer burn. The chemical smell was thick, acrid. He saw Lyra reach the panel beside the door, her hand moving quickly over its surface. The door didn't budge. Access denied, her voice came, strained now. Security lockdown engaged due to energy surge. Locked in, fantastic. He was going to be flash-fried or flash-frozen by rogue alien technology. He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable. Then a loud grinding sound. He snapped his eyes open. Lyra was prying at the seam of the circular door with some kind of tool, a flat bar she must have retrieved from an emergency locker nearby. Sparks showered as metal grated against metal. She was putting her whole body into it, the dark suit straining with the effort. He could see the physical power she possessed, focused and desperate. She's trying to get me out, the thought was strangely shocking. Why protocol or something else? With a final screech of tortured metal, a section of the door buckled outward, creating a gap perhaps a foot wide. Instantly, the chamber's hazardous atmosphere began venting into the corridor, swirling and hissing. Warning lights flashed even faster. "Exit now," Lyra yelled, actually yelled, her voice losing its flatness for the first time, sharp with urgency. She braced the partially open door, straining against the pressure differential and the damaged mechanism. He didn't need telling twice. He scrambled towards the gap, coughing as the acrid chamber air mixed with the corridors. He squeezed through the narrow opening, stumbling out into the relative safety of the corridor. He turned back, expecting Lyra to follow. She wasn't following. She was still bracing the door, looking past him down the corridor. Contaminant seals activating. Section lockdown imminent. Move. He looked where she was looking. Heavy blast doors were descending rapidly at the end of the corridor, cutting off their escape route. He hesitated. Leave her. Go, technician, she ordered, shoving him forward with surprising force. He stumbled, catching his balance just as the blast door slammed shut with a deafening clang, plunging their section of the corridor into near darkness, lit only by the flashing red emergency lights from the chamber doorway. He whirled around. Lyra was still struggling with the chamber door, trying to force it closed against the escaping atmosphere and the damaged frame. The sparking inside the chamber intensified, casting wild shadows. "Lyra," he shouted, moving back towards her. "Forget the door, we need to find another way out." "Containment protocol mandates," she grunted, straining. Another violent arc erupted inside the chamber closer to the doorway. Lyra flinched back, her tool clattering to the floor. She staggered slightly, shaking her head as if dazed. He reacted without thinking. He grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the dangerous opening. "Forget protocol, that thing's gonna blow." Her arm felt solid, unyielding beneath the suit, but she let him pull her back several steps. Her faceplate was turned towards the sparking chamber, then slowly towards him. The red emergency lights reflected off the blank surface, giving it a demonic glow. "Your intervention was illogical," she stated, her breathing seeming slightly uneven. "Primary directive is containment." "Primary directive is survival," he shot back, still gripping her arm. Her suit felt cool, almost vibrating with contained energy, or maybe it was her. "We're trapped. That chamber's unstable. Blast doors down. Any bright ideas, coordinator?" She slowly pulled her arm from his grasp. The movement felt deliberate, assessing. She looked down the now sealed corridor, then back at the sparking chamber door. "Secondary emergency access should be located here." She moved to a section of the seemingly blank wall opposite the chamber, running her hand over it. A faint outline appeared under her touch, a panel he hadn't noticed before. "Requires coordinated biosignature authentication," she said, looking at him. "Yours and mine." His heart leaped. Another forced interface, but this time to escape. "What do we do?" "Place your hand here." She indicated a specific spot on the hidden panel. "Simultaneously, I will place mine here." She pointed to another spot adjacent to it. "System requires 2 distinct, authorized biofields to override lockdown." Authorized? Since when was he authorized? Unless his calibration on the diagnostic tool had registered him somehow. No time to question it. The whining from the chamber was reaching unbearable levels. Okay, on 3. Synchronization is optimal without arbitrary counting, Lyra stated. She placed her gloved hand flat against her designated spot. The panel beneath it glowed blue. Now. He slapped his palm against his spot. It felt cold, metallic. The panel glowed green beneath his hand. For a second, nothing happened. The whining from the chamber intensified. Then, with a deep click, the panel slid sideways, revealing a narrow, dark opening. An access tunnel. Move, Lyra ordered, pushing him towards it, quickly. He scrambled into the tunnel. It was tight, barely shoulder width, and pitched downward into darkness. Metal rungs were set into one wall, a maintenance shaft. He started climbing down immediately, not waiting for her. Behind him, he heard Lyra slide into the tunnel, pulling the access panel shut just as a deafening explosion rocked the corridor outside. Debris rained down onto the closed panel. The structure groaned around them. He froze on the rungs, heart hammering against his ribs. Lyra. I am functional. Her voice came from just above him, calm again, though perhaps slightly breathless. Proceed downwards. The shaft should bypass the sealed section. He continued climbing down, hand over hand, feet searching for the next rung in the pitch blackness. The air here was stale, dusty. He could hear Lyra descending smoothly, silently above him. He was acutely aware of her presence just feet away in the suffocating dark, trapped again. But this time trapped together. And she'd saved him, or tried to, and he'd pulled her away from danger. The dynamic had shifted, subtly but undeniably. They descended for what felt like a long time. The only sounds were his own ragged breathing and the occasional soft scrape of Lyra's suit against the metal walls. The darkness was absolute, pressing in. He focused on the feel of the cold metal rungs under his hands, the rhythmic movement, trying not to think about the explosion, the lockdown, or the fact that he was climbing blindly into the depths of an alien structure with his enigmatic captor. Estimated depth reached for bypass. Lyra's voice came from above. Search for lateral access panel on the right-hand wall. He stopped, reaching out tentatively in the dark. His fingers brushed against a smooth surface, then found a recessed handle. Got something. Attempt to open. He pulled the handle. It resisted for a moment, then slid sideways with a grating sound, revealing not light but a slightly less dense darkness. A different quality of air wafted out, still stale but less confined. It's open. Proceed with caution. He swung himself through the opening, finding himself in another narrow corridor. This one was unlit, except for faint emergency lights spaced far apart, casting long, eerie shadows. It looked like a service tunnel, pipes and conduits lining the walls. It was blessedly empty. Lyra emerged from the shaft behind him, silent as ever. She sealed the access panel. This tunnel should lead towards secondary command center access. Power fluctuations may have impacted automated systems, meaning more locked doors. A possibility, she conceded. We must proceed. They moved down the dark service tunnel, Lyra taking the lead again. Her dark form was barely visible ahead, blending into the shadows. He kept close behind, straining his eyes in the gloom. The silence felt heavier here, broken only by distant mechanical groans and the drip of unseen condensation. They encountered several junctions, Lyra pausing briefly at each, seemingly consulting some internal navigation system before choosing a path. He had no choice but to trust her. Lost in the guts of this place, she was his only guide. An unnerving thought. After navigating a particularly tight section filled with thick, humming cables, they reached another junction. Lyra stopped abruptly. He nearly collided with her back. He put a hand out to steady himself, fingers brushing the cool, smooth material of her suit. She didn't react, didn't even seem to notice, her attention focused ahead. Problem, he whispered. Energy signature detected ahead, she murmured, her voice low. Non-standard pattern, potentially hostile. Hostile to whom? Them or just Cathar systems? What kind of hostile? Unknown classification. Residual energy discharge consistent with Terran weaponry, but amplified, unstable. Terran weapons. Down here, how? Had someone else survived the crash and tried to fight back? Or was it something the Cathar salvaged? We must reroute, Lyra stated decisively, turning towards a smaller, darker side passage. This way. The side passage was more of a crawl space. They had to crouch low, almost crawl in some sections. Pipes pressed in on both sides, radiating faint heat or cold. Dust motes danced in the beam of a single emergency light far down the passage. Progress was slow, uncomfortable. He could hear Lyra's suit scraping occasionally against the pipes ahead. He felt claustrophobic, trapped. The air was thick with the smell of dust and old machinery. His earlier anxiety returned, amplified by the darkness and confinement. He focused on Lyra's dim silhouette ahead, a strange anchor in the oppressive environment. Suddenly she stopped again. He bumped into her legs in the tight space. "What now?" he hissed. "Obstruction," she replied. "Structural collapse. This passage is blocked." Blocked, he peered around her. Ahead, the tunnel was completely choked with fallen girders and debris, twisted metal and shattered conduits. No way through. "Can we go back?" "Negative. Energy signature behind us is intensifying, moving closer." Trapped again between an unknown energy threat and a dead end, panic started to claw at his throat. "So, what? We just wait here?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. She was examining the blockage, running a gloved hand over the tangled metal. There may be a viable path through the debris field, requires careful navigation, high risk of further collapse. High risk, of course. Define high risk. Probability of structural failure estimated at 63.7%, she stated calmly. 63% chance of being crushed. Great odds, but the alternative was waiting for whatever was coming up behind them. He looked back down the dark crawl space. He thought he saw a faint flicker of light in the distance, or maybe it was just his stressed-out eyes playing tricks. "Okay," he said, his voice tight. "Let's try the debris field. Lead on." Lyra nodded almost imperceptibly. She began to carefully pick her way into the tangled mess, testing handholds and footholds, moving with incredible precision and balance despite the bulky suit. He followed close behind, mimicking her movements, trying not to dislodge anything. The debris was unstable. Metal groaned under their weight, dust rained down. Small rocks skittered into the darkness below. He held his breath, moving centimeter by centimeter, every muscle tensed. He could feel Lyra just ahead, her focused presence a strange sort of reassurance. They were in this together, whether he liked it or not. They reached a particularly tight squeeze, a narrow gap between a buckled girder and the tunnel wall. Lyra slid through sideways. He followed, sucking in his gut, scraping his shoulder against rough metal. As he emerged, his foot slipped on loose rubble. He lost his balance, falling forward, arms flailing. He crashed directly into Lyra's back. The impact knocked the breath out of him. He found himself pressed against her, his chest against the hard planes of her suit back, his arms instinctively wrapping around her waist to stop his fall. For a split second, they were tangled together in the narrow space, surrounded by darkness and precarious debris. He felt the solidness of her form, the surprising density beneath the suit material. He felt the slight vibration of her internal systems, and again that distinct coolness, even through layers of clothing and suit. He froze, suddenly hyper-aware of the intimacy of the accidental embrace. His heart hammered against her back. Lyra stiffened for a fraction of a second, then slowly turned her head, the blank faceplate just inches from his. He could see his own wide, panicked eyes reflected back at him. "Technician Ryder," she said, her voice utterly level, yet somehow seeming amplified in the confined space. "Maintain designated spatial separation protocols." He scrambled back instantly, disengaging, feeling heat rise in his face despite the cool air. "Sorry, slipped." "Acknowledged." She turned back to assessing the path ahead, seemingly unfazed. But had he imagined a slight rigidity in her posture before she spoke? A fractional pause that wasn't part of her usual calculated movements, probably just projecting again. They continued through the debris field, the tension thicker than ever. The earlier physical contacts, the diagnostic check, the brush of hands, the shove in the corridor had been clinical, accidental, or functional. This felt different. An uncontrolled collision. A moment of forced, unwanted intimacy in a high-stress situation. It left him feeling raw, exposed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they emerged from the worst of the debris into another section of service tunnel. This one was clearer, though still dark and damaged. They paused, catching their breath. He leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. "Energy signature behind us has stabilized," Lyra reported, her voice back to its usual flat calm. "It is not advancing." "Good," he wiped sweat and dust from his forehead with a shaky hand. "Where to now?" "Nearest access to primary transit system is 1.7 clicks northeast," she said. "If operational, it offers fastest route to secondary command." "If operational," he echoed wearily. "Let's hope." They set off again, the pace faster now in the clearer tunnel. He found himself watching Lyra's back, the way she moved, the economy of her motion. He thought about the collision in the debris, the solid feel of her, the coldness, the absolute lack of overt reaction. Was she really just a machine in a suit, or was there something else buried deep beneath the logic and protocols? He pushed the thought away. Didn't matter. Survival was the only thing that mattered. Get to safety, find answers, get out. They reached a larger junction, signs of battle evident here. Scorch marks on the walls, discarded pieces of Cathar technology, and something else. A shattered Terran pulse rifle lying near a blast crater. His heart clenched. Someone had fought back here. Someone from the Venture. Had they made it? Lyra paused, scanning the area. Residual energy signature matches the previous anomaly. Source appears neutralized. Neutralized, or the user was dead. He knelt by the rifle, touching the cold, damaged metal. Standard issue. Could have belonged to anyone on the security team. He felt a fresh wave of grief and anger. "We should keep moving," Lyra stated, her voice pulling him back to the present danger. "This area is structurally compromised." He nodded numbly, pushing himself to his feet. He glanced back at the rifle one last time, then followed Lyra towards a heavy door marked with complex Cathar symbols that presumably indicated the transit system. Lyra placed her hand on the door panel. It remained dark. Power failure confirmed. "Of course, never easy. Manual override." "Possible," she said, examining the panel mechanism. "Requires bypassing the primary lock and accessing the auxiliary power relay. Complex procedure." She looked at him. "Your assistance is required." Here we go again. More forced cooperation, more proximity. He took a breath. "Tell me what to do." She indicated a small access hatch near the base of the door. "Pry open this panel. Inside, locate the energy shunt conduits, usually color-coded, though Terran visual spectrum may differ." He found a discarded metal bar nearby, probably from the firefight, and used it to pry open the hatch. Inside was a tangle of wires and crystalline components, humming faintly. "Okay, I see. Blue, green, and a kind of pulsing purple." "Ignore green, environmental," Lyra instructed, kneeling beside him, her shoulder occasionally brushing his as they both peered into the cramped space. He tried to ignore the contact, focusing on the wires. "Purple is primary lock feed. Blue is auxiliary relay. You need to carefully disconnect purple, then bridge the connection from blue to the lock receiver node." "Receiver node," he scanned the components. "Which one is that?" Lyra leaned closer, pointing with a gloved finger. Her faceplate was right beside his head. He could feel the faint coolness radiating from it, smell that ozone scent again. Her finger traced a path through the wires to a small, multifaceted crystal. "This node. Be precise. Accidental contact with adjacent circuits could trigger defensive countermeasures. Defensive countermeasures sounded bad. He took the metal bar, using its flattened end to carefully nudge the purple connector away from its socket. It came loose with a soft click. The humming lessened slightly. Okay, purple disconnected. Now reroute the blue conduit, Lyra instructed, her voice low and close. Requires steady hands. His hands weren't steady. Not with her this close, the memory of the collision fresh, the fate of his crewmates weighing on him. But he had to do this. He carefully manipulated the blue connector, guiding it towards the crystal node. It was awkward, the space tight, his fingers clumsy. He fumbled. The connector slipped, brushing against an adjacent circuit. Sparks flew. A loud click echoed from the door mechanism. Red lights flashed above the door. Countermeasures initiated, Lyra stated, instantly pulling back. Security lockdown engaging. Magnetic seals activating. A heavy clamping sound resonated through the door. They were locked out, again. Damn it, Alex cursed, pulling his hand back from the panel. Sorry. Apology is irrelevant, Lyra said, already examining the door seals. The magnetic locks are now active. Bypassing them requires significant energy input, directed precisely. She looked around, her gaze settling on the damaged pulse rifle. The power cell from the Terran weapon might suffice, if channeled correctly. She retrieved the rifle. He watched as she expertly ejected the energy cell, a standard Terran microfusion pack, still holding a partial charge according to its indicator. She examined it, then looked back at the access panel. This requires a direct interface. Risky. The energy discharge could be unstable. She looked at him, then at the power cell, then back at the panel. There was a long pause. The interface point is small, she said finally, her voice exceptionally flat. Requires precise manual contact to channel the energy. She held up the power cell. My manipulators, she flexed her gloved fingers, lack the required tactile sensitivity for this specific configuration. Your bare hand would provide optimal conductivity and control. His bare hand, touching that power cell while channeling its energy into the Cathar lock. Are you insane? That thing could discharge unpredictably. It could fry my hand off. Risk calculated at 48.9% for severe localized energy burns, Lyra stated. Lower if contact is precise and duration minimized. Just under a 50% chance of being maimed. Wonderful. Why can't you use the diagnostic tool again, or something? Insufficient power throughput, she replied. Direct bioelectrical channeling is the only remaining option besides waiting for external intervention, which is unlikely given current communication silence and structural instability. So risk frying his hand, or wait here to be potentially crushed or discovered by whatever that energy signature was. Some choice. He looked at the power cell, then at his own hand. He thought about the venture, about finding answers. Okay, he said grimly. How do I do this without losing a limb? Lyra showed him the contact points on the power cell and the specific node within the access panel he needed to bridge. Maintain firm, direct pressure. Channel initiated on my command. Break contact immediately when the magnetic locks disengage. You will hear a distinct click and whine. He took a deep breath, knelt down again, positioning the power cell carefully. He hesitated, hand hovering over the contacts. This was insane, absolutely insane. He glanced at Lyra. Her faceplate was turned towards him, unreadable as always, but was there a flicker of something? In her stillness, anticipation, concern, impossible to tell. Initiate contact, she commanded. He pressed his fingers against the cool metal of the power cell contacts and the Cathar node simultaneously. Nothing happened for a second. Then, intense heat flared under his fingertips. Energy surged up his arm, making his muscles contract violently. It felt like grabbing a live high-voltage cable. He gritted his teeth, fighting the instinct to pull away, focusing on maintaining pressure. The air crackled around his hand. He could smell ozone, burning metal, and something else searing flesh. his flesh. Channeling energy, Lyra reported, watching the door intently. Magnetic field destabilizing. The heat intensified. Pain, sharp and fierce, shot up his arm. His vision started to gray out at the edges. Hold on, just hold on. Locks disengaging, Lyra shouted. A loud click followed by a high-pitched whine from the door seals. Break contact now. He ripped his hand away, collapsing backward with a strangled cry. His fingers were numb, tingling, and looked terrifyingly red, angry blisters already forming. The smell of burned skin filled the air. He cradled his injured hand to his chest, rocking back and forth, trying to breathe through the waves of pain. Lyra was already pushing the heavy door open. Clear, she announced, then turned back to him. She knelt beside him, her movements economical even now. Injury assessment required. Before he could protest, she took his injured hand gently but firmly in her gloved one. Her touch was cool against his feverish skin, a strange contrast to the searing pain. She examined the burns clinically, tilting his hand this way and that under the dim emergency lights. Second-degree thermal energy burns across 3 digits, she diagnosed calmly. Epidermal damage significant but localized. No immediate signs of neurovascular compromise beyond expected inflammation. She produced a small tube from her suit, different from the diagnostic tools. Analgesic and regenerative biogel. She carefully applied the cool, clear gel to his burns. It stung for a second, then a blessed numbness began to spread, dulling the worst of the pain. He watched her work, her touch surprisingly gentle, precise. Her faceplate was angled down, hiding her expression completely, but her focus seemed entirely on his injured hand. The simple, practical act of tending to his wound felt strangely intimate after the violence of the energy discharge and the constant tension between them. He felt a confusing mix of gratitude, resentment, and sheer exhaustion. Why, he finally croaked out, his voice hoarse. Why risk this? Why not just leave me? Lyra finished applying the gel, her cool fingers lingering for a fraction of a second longer than necessary on his wrist before withdrawing. She looked up, the blank faceplate seeming to bore into him. Your survival is designated. Preferable, she stated, her voice still flat but with an unusual cadence, almost hesitant. Your technical skills remain valuable, and protocol dictates minimizing unnecessary attrition of potentially compatible assets. Potentially compatible assets, right, back to being a useful object, but the hesitation, the way she'd tended to his hand, it felt like more than just protocol, or maybe he was just delirious from pain and stress. She rose smoothly to her feet. Can you proceed? He looked at his bandaged hand, then pushed himself up, wincing. Yeah, let's go. The transit system door stood open, revealing a dark platform and the sleek, silent shape of a Cathar transit pod waiting on the track. Salvation, or just the next stage of his captivity. He followed Lyra onto the platform, the throbbing pain in his hand a constant reminder of the price of passage, and the ambiguous connection he now shared with the alien coordinator who had both endangered and saved him. The transit pod was as sleek and minimalist inside as everything else. Smooth, dark surfaces, low blue lighting, no visible controls, just 2 facing bench seats. Lyra gestured for him to sit. He sank onto the cool material, cradling his injured hand. The doors slid shut silently, sealing them inside. A low hum started, and the pod began to move, gliding smoothly and rapidly through the darkness of the transit tunnel. He watched the tunnel lights blur past the narrow window. Where were they going? Secondary command. What would happen there? More tests, more questions, meeting other Cathar. The thought was unsettling. Lyra had become a known quantity, albeit a dangerous and confusing one. Facing more of her kind felt like stepping into even deeper, colder water. Lyra sat opposite him, perfectly still, faceplate reflecting the streaking lights. She hadn't spoken since they boarded the pod. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the pod's movement. He found himself studying her silhouette, the way the dark suit fit her tall frame, the utter lack of fidgeting or unnecessary movement. She was composure personified, except he kept replaying the moments of potential cracks, the slight hesitation, the surprising force of her shove, the way she tended his burned hand. Were they real, or just wishful thinking from a stressed-out human brain desperate for connection? "This compatibility thing," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice sounded loud in the confined space. "What does it actually mean?" Lyra's head tilted slightly. "Data insufficient for comprehensive explanation accessible to Terran understanding." "Try me," he persisted, leaning forward slightly despite the throb in his hand. "Is it biological, technical? Are you looking for workers, soldiers, lab rats?" "Cathar society values functional integration," she replied obliquely. "Compatibility assessment identifies potential for synergistic coexistence across multiple operational levels." Synergistic coexistence sounded like corporate jargon for assimilation. So you find species, you test them, and if they're compatible, you, what? Invite them to join the Confederacy or force them. Integration protocols vary based on species' technological level, social structure, and demonstrated adherence to logical principles, Lyra stated. Voluntary assimilation is preferred. Coercive measures are employed only when strategic necessity dictates. Strategic necessity, like trespassing during a security alert, lucky him, and humans, where do we fall on that scale? Terran potential is ambiguous, she said after a fractional pause. High capacity for adaptive problem-solving, counterbalanced by illogical emotional volatility and inefficient social paradigms. Emotional volatility, he repeated dryly. Right, like getting upset when someone blows up your ship and kidnaps you. Precisely, Lyra confirmed, completely missing the sarcasm. Such reactions impede optimal decision-making. He almost laughed, almost. The sheer alienness of her perspective was staggering. So, my assessment helps you decide if I'm useful enough despite my deplorable human emotions. Correct. Your performance under duress, your technical aptitude, your physiological responses. All data points contribute to the compatibility index. He leaned back, suddenly feeling weary down to his bones. He was just a collection of data points to her, a calculation, an asset to be managed. And yet, she'd risked herself back at the chamber door. She'd tended his burns with something that felt almost like care. It didn't compute. The pod began to decelerate smoothly. "Approaching secondary command transit hub," Lyra announced. He braced himself. Whatever came next, it probably wouldn't be pleasant. The pod slid to a halt. The doors opened onto a larger platform, brighter than the service tunnels but still bathed in that ubiquitous blue light. This area felt different, though, more active. He could hear distant sounds, humming machinery, clicking sounds, maybe even voices, though not human ones. And there were other Cathar. Several figures stood on the platform, clad in similar dark suits, some with different colored accents or insignia he couldn't interpret. All wore the same blank faceplates. They turned as Lyra stepped out of the pod, their movements synchronized, unnervingly uniform. They didn't seem surprised to see him. They regarded him with the same detached curiosity as security cameras. Great, more of them. He stepped out hesitantly, trying to appear less intimidated than he felt. He kept close to Lyra, a paradoxical impulse. She was his captor, but also the only familiar entity in this place. One of the Cathar, distinguished by silver markings on its suit, approached Lyra. They exchanged a series of rapid, low-frequency clicks and tonal shifts that were clearly their native language. It sounded like rocks tumbling in a synthesizer. Alex couldn't understand a word, but the tone felt procedural, reporting in. The silver-marked Cathar then turned its faceplate towards Alex. It felt like being pinned by an insect's multifaceted eye. "The Terran asset," it stated in the same flat, synthesized voice as Lyra, though perhaps a slightly lower pitch. Biometric signature confirmed. Damage noted. It gestured towards his bandaged hand. Sustained during necessary bypass of security protocols, Lyra reported. Asset remains functional. Asset functional, he gritted his teeth. Proceed to integration analysis, the silver-marked Cathar commanded. Coordinator Lyra, you will oversee the process directly. Acknowledged, Lyra replied. She turned to Alex. Follow. She led him away from the platform, down another wide corridor. The other Cathar dispersed silently. This corridor was busier. Other Cathar glided past, some operating floating cargo platforms, others accessing wall consoles. None paid him much attention beyond a brief, unreadable glance from their faceplates. It was unnerving, being the only human, the only visibly different being in this cold, alien environment. They arrived at another set of doors. These were larger, more ornate, marked with complex, glowing Cathar symbols. Integration Analysis Chamber, Lyra announced. Sounds ominous. What happens in there? Comprehensive assessment of your cognitive functions, emotional responses, and potential alignment with Cathar operational directives, she explained. Involves direct neural interface. Direct neural interface. Alarm bells didn't just ring, they screamed. Whoa, hold on, neural interface, like sticking wires in my brain. Interface is non-invasive, Lyra clarified. Utilizes focused bioresonant fields to map neural pathways and assess compatibility metrics. Minimal physical sensation reported by prior subjects. Prior subjects, how many others had gone through this, and what happened to them? Minimal sensation, I find that hard to believe. Cathar physiology differs, she stated. Your species' heightened somatic sensitivity may result in variable experiences. Variable experiences. Great euphemism for might hurt like hell. He backed away from the door instinctively. No, absolutely not. I fix your machines, I freeze in your test chambers, I burn my hand for you, but you are not messing with my head. Lyra stepped towards him, blocking his retreat. Her posture seemed slightly more imposing than usual. This procedure is mandatory. Non-compliance is not an option for assets designated for potential integration. I'm not an asset, he snapped, fear making him reckless. I'm a prisoner, a human, not some component you can just plug into your system. Your classification is Terran, Lyra corrected calmly, though her proximity felt like a physical weight. Your status is potential integrant. Refusal necessitates reclassification. Reclassification to what? Discarded scrap. Protocols for non-viable assets involve resource reclamation, she stated flatly. Resource reclamation sounded suspiciously like recycling. His recycling. He felt trapped, cornered. Fight or flight kicked in, but there was nowhere to run, and fighting her seemed suicidal. He looked past her at the imposing doors, then back at her blank faceplate. Desperation gnawed at him. Why are you doing this? He asked, his voice low, pleading despite himself. What do you people actually want? Lyra tilted her head. For a long moment she was silent, just observing him. The ambient blue light reflected off her faceplate, hiding whatever might be behind it. Then she spoke, her voice losing some of its synthesized flatness, becoming quieter, almost reflective. We seek order, she said. Stability, an end to the chaos inherent in biological divergence. Integration allows optimization, reduction of conflict, harmonization. Harmonization, he scoffed bitterly. By erasing individuality, by forcing everyone into your cold, logical mold. Individuality, as Terrans define it, is often synonymous with inefficiency, conflict, and suffering, Lyra countered. Logical integration offers coherence, purpose. Purpose? He stared at her, trying to see past the mask, past the alienness. Is that what you have, Lyra? Purpose? Or just programming? The question hung in the air. Lyra didn't answer immediately. She seemed stiller than usual, as if processing an unexpected variable. "My function is clear," she said finally, her voice returning to its standard flat tone. "As is yours should you comply." He looked at the door again, then back at her. Compliance meant letting them into his mind. Refusal meant resource reclamation. He thought about his burned hand, the pain he'd endured. He thought about the venture, the unanswered questions. Maybe surviving this interface was the only way to get those answers. The only way to find out if anyone else was alive. It was a terrifying gamble. He took a ragged breath. What exactly does it involve, the interface? Lyra seemed to relax fractionally, though her posture remained formal. "You will be positioned within a diagnostic field generator. Sensory input will be minimized. Focused resonant waves will stimulate neural activity, allowing passive data acquisition." She gestured towards the door. "The process duration is variable, typically 2 to 3 chrono units." 2 to 3 units of having his brain scanned by aliens. He felt sick. But what choice did he have? He looked at his bandaged hand, the cool numbness of the gel starting to fade, replaced by a dull ache. He'd survived worse today. Maybe. "All right," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Fine, let's get this over with." Lyra nodded once, a sharp, precise movement. She turned and placed her hand on the door panel. The large doors slid open silently, revealing the chamber beyond. It was large, circular, dimly lit, dominated by a single, complex chair-like apparatus in the center, surrounded by humming technological arrays. Integration analysis. He took one last look back down the corridor, the path he'd taken through darkness and danger. Then, bracing himself, he followed Lyra into the chamber, towards the machine that would delve into the depths of his human mind. The doors slid shut behind him, sealing his fate. The chair looked less like furniture and more like a high-tech restraint device. Smooth, dark metal molded into contours that didn't look comfortable. Cables snaked from it to the surrounding machinery. Lyra guided him towards it. "Position yourself in the apparatus," she instructed. He hesitated. This felt incredibly wrong, like volunteering for his own autopsy. Will I be conscious?" "Yes," Lyra confirmed. "Consciousness is required for accurate emotional response mapping. Sensory deprivation protocols will minimize external stimuli to facilitate focus." Conscious? Great. He'd get to experience every resonant wave probing his thoughts and feelings. He slowly sat down in the chair. It was cold, hard. Restraints, smooth and metallic, automatically slid into place over his wrists, ankles, and forehead, holding him firmly but not painfully. He felt utterly powerless, pinned like an insect specimen. Lyra moved to a large console nearby, her fingers flying over the alien controls. Lights on the arrays surrounding him intensified slightly, shifting from blue to a soft, pulsing violet. A low hum filled the room, vibrating through the chair and into his bones. "Initializing diagnostic field," Lyra announced. "Minimize cognitive resistance. Allow the resonant frequencies to permeate." Minimize cognitive resistance. Right. Just relax while the alien machine reads your soul. He closed his eyes, trying to control his breathing, trying to brace himself for whatever was coming. The hum intensified, seeming to resonate directly inside his skull. It wasn't painful, not exactly, but it was deeply, profoundly unpleasant. It felt like pressure, an insistent, invasive pressure building inside his head behind his eyes. He could feel his thoughts skittering away from it, his memories churning unwillingly to the surface. Flashes of the venture, laughter in the mess hall, the sudden violent lurch of the attack, red alert lights, screaming, the cold silence of the escape pod, waking up to Lyra's impassive faceplate. He tried to focus, to build mental walls, but the resonant field seemed to flow around them, seeping through the cracks. It felt intimate in the worst possible way, like having his deepest fears and insecurities laid bare under a cold, analytical light. He could feel his emotions surging in response, fear, anger, grief, loneliness, amplified by the field, raw and exposed. He gritted his teeth, fighting against the invasive sensation, against the forced vulnerability. He focused on Lyra, on the image of her blank faceplate. He tried to project defiance, resentment, anything to push back against the intrusion. Subject exhibiting elevated emotional distress. Lyra's voice came over an internal speaker in the chair, calm and clinical. Resistance patterns noted, increasing field modulation to compensate. The pressure intensified. It felt like his skull was contracting. The flashes of memory became more vivid, more chaotic. He saw faces, crewmates, friends, gone, all gone. The uncertainty was agony. He felt tears prickling his eyes, a hot wave of grief washing over him. He fought it back, refusing to break down in this machine under her observation. Then something shifted. The focus of the field seemed to change. It wasn't just pulling memories, it felt like it was probing, searching for something specific. Compatibility metrics, she'd said. What were they looking for? Alignment, submission. He felt a strange, alien thought brush against his own, cold, logical, structured. Not words, but pure concepts. Order, stability, integration. It felt like her mind or the Cathar collective consciousness touching his. It was terrifyingly intimate. He recoiled mentally, trying to shield himself. Anomaly detected, Lyra's voice said, a subtle change in inflection. Surprise. Unexpected synaptic resonance. Cross-species harmonic frequency identified. What the hell did that mean? The field pulsed strongly, focusing on that point of resonance. It felt strange, not entirely unpleasant now, like finding a single matching tuning fork in a cacophony of noise. There was a flicker of understanding, a shared wavelength beneath the vast differences. It was confusing, disorienting. He focused on that flicker, on the faint sense of connection within the invasive field. He thought of Lyra, her contradictions, her moments of almost humanity hidden beneath the alien protocols. Was this resonance, her, a link forming between them through the machine? The field surged again, stronger this time. It overwhelmed the faint resonance, pushing deeper, harder. The pressure became unbearable. His vision tunneled. He felt like he was drowning, losing himself in the cold, analytical depths of the Cathar assessment. He cried out, a raw sound torn from his throat, fighting against the overwhelming tide. And then, abruptly, it stopped. The pressure vanished, the humming faded, the violet lights dimmed. Silence descended on the chamber, broken only by his own harsh, ragged breathing. The restraints retracted. He slumped forward in the chair, trembling, drenched in cold sweat, utterly drained. He slowly lifted his head, looking towards the console. Lyra stood there, motionless, her back to him. She didn't turn around immediately. She seemed frozen, one hand still hovering over the controls. "Lyra," he rasped, his voice barely audible. What happened?" She finally turned slowly. Her faceplate was, as always, blank, but her posture seemed different, less rigid, or was he imagining things? "Analysis complete," she stated, her voice carefully neutral but perhaps lacking its usual metallic edge. "Results, complex." "Complex?" He pushed himself weakly out of the chair, legs unsteady. "What does that mean?" "Your compatibility index exceeds baseline parameters for Terran subjects," she said, walking towards him. "Significantly." "Exceeds baseline. Was that good or bad? So, I passed your test." "You exhibit a high degree of neurological adaptability," Lyra continued, stopping a few feet away, "and an unexpected capacity for resonant frequency alignment with Cathar cognitive patterns." She tilted her head. "Specifically, with mine." With hers, that resonance he felt. It was her. The thought sent a jolt through him, more profound than the machine's probing. They were connected somehow, on a level he couldn't understand. "What does that mean?" he asked again, his voice low. "Implications are under evaluation," Lyra replied. She took another step closer, close enough that he could feel that subtle coolness again, close enough that he could see his own reflection clearly in her faceplate, pale, shaken, vulnerable. Your status requires reassessment. Reassessment, not resource reclamation, not immediate integration, something else. He felt a strange mix of fear and something else. Anticipation, curiosity. He was exhausted, traumatized, but the connection, the shared resonance. It was undeniable. It changed things. Lyra reached out, her gloved hand stopping just short of his face. A diagnostic gesture, or something more. He didn't flinch this time. He held his breath, watching her hand, watching his own reflection in her mask. Your physiological state indicates extreme stress, she observed, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. Yet, the resonance persists. He met the blank gaze of the faceplate, feeling stripped bare, defenses shattered by the machine. He didn't have the energy for sarcasm or defiance anymore. "Yeah," he whispered. "I feel it too." The air crackled with unspoken tension. The vast gulf between their species, their experiences, their very natures, seemed both insurmountable and strangely irrelevant in that moment. There was just the two of them, the silence and the echo of that unexpected connection. Lyra's fingers twitched, as if she wanted to complete the gesture, to touch him, but protocol or uncertainty held her back. He saw his own reflection waver, saw the confusion and exhaustion in his own eyes. He felt exposed, raw, standing on the edge of something unknown and dangerous. "The procedure," Lyra began, then paused, searching for the right word. "It requires refinement, adjustment for your specific parameters." She seemed to be struggling with the terminology, the implications. He didn't know what to say. He just stood there, meeting her gaze, accepting the ambiguity, the danger, the undeniable pull of the connection forged in the heart of the alien machine. The doors to the chamber slid open, revealing the silver-marked Cathar from the transit hub. It surveyed the scene, Alex standing drained and trembling, Lyra poised uncertainly before him. "Coordinator Lyra," the Cathar supervisor stated, its voice flat and commanding. "Report." Lyra straightened instantly, her posture snapping back to formal rigidity. She turned away from Alex, facing her superior. "Analysis complete, Commander. Results indicate significant anomalies requiring further assessment. Asset exhibits unprecedented resonance potential." The commander's faceplate tilted towards Alex, assessing him with cold, analytical intensity. "Unprecedented. Explain." "Direct synaptic harmonics achieved," Lyra reported. "Cross-referencing indicates alignment primarily localized to my operational frequency." The commander was silent for a long moment, processing this. The air grew heavy again. Alex felt like a specimen under scrutiny, his fate hanging in the balance based on data he didn't understand. "Intriguing," the commander finally stated. "This development warrants revised protocols. Coordinator Lyra, you are assigned as primary liaison and handler for this asset, effective immediately. All further integration analysis will be conducted under your direct supervision, utilizing modified parameters to explore this resonance." It turned its attention back to Alex. "Asset Rider, your potential value has increased, as has your potential risk. Cooperate fully with Coordinator Lyra. Your future depends on it." With that, the commander turned and glided out of the chamber, leaving Alex alone with Lyra once more. The weight of the new assignment hung between them. Primary liaison, handler, explore the resonance. Lyra turned back to him. Her faceplate was unreadable, but he sensed a shift, a subtle tension in her stillness. The dynamic between them had irrevocably changed again. She was no longer just his captor, his evaluator. She was his designated handler, tasked with exploring the strange connection they shared. "Come," she said, her voice back to its usual flat tone, but perhaps with a shade less certainty than before. "You require rest and recalibration." He nodded mutely, too drained to argue or question. He followed her out of the integration analysis chamber, away from the invasive machine, back into the blue-lit corridors of the Cathar base. But nothing felt the same. The connection hummed beneath the surface, a silent, invisible tether linking him to the enigmatic alien coordinator walking silently beside him. He didn't know where this path led, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. He was caught in her orbit, bound by a resonance he didn't understand, heading towards an unknown future.